Hey, Al, I think we're live. Are we live? I think we're live.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Traveling Molly's. And here we are in March of 2025 with a great lineup here of open mic readers. And our features tonight are Lee Herrick and Rachel Robbins. So anxious to hear everyone read. And Nina Corwin, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing good and much better. Actually, this is a rain date for Rachel and Lee. Back in January, we had to cancel because I was getting surgery and Al was not available.
Yes, I was
And
on a plane at the time. So
oh, right. And but here we are too much without too much ado and not that much loss. And I was so glad you guys were able to come back and join us. Our features tonight, Lee Herrick, Rachel Robbins. I think you're gonna love both of them. But as we generally do, Al and I both start with a poem. Just to kind of kick it all off, and then we'll get to our open micers. And then for those who haven't been here before, that's where we start. Then we go to our features, and then after they're finished reading, we'll have a conversation between the two of them and myself. And usually there's a lot of interesting things that come out of that. You never know. So I'm going to start by reading a poem called Orpheus Rebounding, which I may or may not be able to see in this light. Back to Earth, his rescue mission an abject failure. Orpheus flogs himself for that fateful turn. With Eurydice back in the hot arms of Hades, he is pathetic as a raisin, all the juice wrung out, parade of wailing animals bringing up the rear. At the condo, there's nothing for comfort but his old lyre, grown frumpish and dingy from disuse. The wood nymphs come ringing his doorbell, beseeching him to serenade them with vicarious love, but he hasn't got it in him, and soon they give up and drift away. Eventually, however, and for want of anything better to do, he picks up the neglected instrument, listlessly begins to finger the strings, and as he does, he remembers how he'd play Eurydice, sometimes pull her hair back, pluck at the harp of her, the notes she would make, forming a sweet oh. As in, oh, the openings to all things delicious, oh, the berries and melons of her flesh, oh, the way the way she'd rise and fall to his touch, and even just plain oh. Like honey from honeycomb, the notes come trickling out and the forest catches its breath. The animals and the wood nymphs draw near, and soon he's got his groupies again, like Eurydice back in the days of the smoky blue bars. The gods have given him a gift indeed. He thinks, gift indeed, he thinks, and counts his blessings, how they could have wearied of each other or worse. Yet there she'd be like an empty cereal box, though not as easy to dispose of. Instead, she is beautifully dead and he is free. Free of the tarnish and clutter, the dank and musty corners, free to clean house and remember their romance, brimming and spotless, free to start over, just plain free. Something in his rusty loins begins to hum. He looks up to see a woman smiling. Thank you. All
Thank,
right.
thank you, Nina.
Ellen.
This is a short poem, newer. I don't know, I haven't been able to write long poems for the last few months, which is okay. So this is called Dark Guitars. We drink from our own well, raindrops like the sea filling the navel void. Pour your dirty martini down my squares of flannel. We write a language composed of kisses and leaves. Burn the desert of old poems. Run our fingers through the hair of old cold memory. We're mad but magic, no lies to hide behind. Perhaps these are not poetic times. Perhaps poetry is in the ringing bells, our cathedral of dark guitars without mornings. We sip from the same glass, lips melting ice cubes. Thank you, thank you. So, Nina and I have broken the ice, and we'll start the open mic. Ruth Goring, would you like to start for us?
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And this is just a lovely way to do a poetry reading that allows us to be in different places, and I'm thankful for it. I personally have been struggling a lot with the contents of my news feed. I'm not going to refer to anything directly. I'm going to read a poem from a few years ago that is called La Niña, about a certain weather pattern that causes, in Colombia, where I have my second home, it causes extreme rain and floods and avalanches. La Niña. It starts with a quote from The Guardian Weekly. It has never rained so much in Colombia. In the earth of my skin, in its ashes, the guitar of me is strummed for tired songs. Above us, clouds bulge, balloon, collapse into torrents, and mountainsides, logged and grazed to nakedness, slumped into ruin over homes and paths. Stones lie bewildered, guava trees plucked like weeds, rot in a tangle of branches. In the earth of my skin, this lament, my peasant bones cry, Madre mia, how we have confounded your calm, how we have bruised you, our mother. I'm focused on creative work, a rhythm of creative work and activism. And I'm going to let this poem about creative work stand for both of them. And the images here have to do with creating mosaic pieces with tile and other objects of various kinds. This poem is called Craft. In my mind, I am often breaking tiles, all the shades of green, to pattern into leaves, mosaic forests. Will these woods be boreal, tropical, or a rare forest by the sea? What is their source of light? I am planting a forest for you. I will plant again and again, trees to shade you, to absorb your spent breath. I will bring wind onto these surfaces, make branches sway and cry out, send leaves flying. The sun will find its way in. Later, under a pumice moon, the forest will rustle with quieter conversation. My hands cut knitting for its waterfalls, foil threads for roots that carry moisture deep into soil. Come. Thank you.
Well, so we've had three poets with stringed instrument poems, and I would imagine that will stop because how often does that happen? Thank you, Ruth. How about let's hear from Richard Nestor. We haven't seen you in a while. Richard Nestor.
You need me to move?
No, well, Nina, the instrument I'm going to refer to is not a stringed instrument. It's a harmonica. I began playing harmonica when I was in my 40s for the same reason I began writing poetry in my teens, which was an overwhelming desire just to get in on the conversation. Since then, I've had the good fortune to sit in with many talented musicians, both amateur and professional. And one of the best is the central figure of this poem, which is called Faith and Besides. For which I'd better put on my glasses. The diner in Hopper's painting, Nighthawks. Kate's music lit me up like that. Not the light you get from jazz or blues or rhythm and blues. The stuff the barman's transistor radio plays, raunchy, hip-shaking stuff to fit the coffee and the cigarettes and the bottle back of the counter. Her light was gospel light, the Maybelle Carter kind of back porch country that could make a church out of a few chairs. Her guitar and voice and my harp in Mom's living room. A command performance, you might call it, Mom being ill and in deep need of notes from her girlhood. This was old-time music before anyone called it that. Songs Kate had played and Mom had heard 1,000 times. Kate kept asking me if I knew such and such, always surprised when I said no. Then she'd start, 1, 2, 3 notes, and I'd recognize a tune I probably heard first in utero. The recognition that sudden, and I'd play it, note for note, as if transported. She kept telling me how good I'd done, as if I was the one doing it. It wasn't music, it was prayer, which is how she played and sang. We've played a bunch of times since then, other parlors and porches, and a family reunion where she testified about how Jesus came into her life. I don't wish to believe as she does, but I wish for her sake that I could, because she wants me to. She plays for God and to welcome those in need of Him, which is all of us. I play because I can play the hell out of it. I mean, that good, full of a devil pride in pure accomplishment. It was a wonder. It would be a wonder to her how I could play so heartfeltly without belief. I suppose she assumes my faith. Or maybe I'm the one who finds it mysterious. At least if I turned Christian, I could be of use in times of trouble, telling others I'd pray for them. Doctors say it's useful, though they don't know why, any more than I know about resurrection. Though maybe even Jesus was surprised when it happened, like waking in a strange town on a bed with strange sheets. I owe the childhood preaching everything and nothing. If not for it, I'd probably not be writing poetry. But poets rarely know themselves, their words but puzzles, one guess, one lie piled on another. Maybe my cells know, or maybe the soul's a sort of residue, like alcohol evaporated in a still and then condensed out. God's liquor. The light inside the diner is warm, as if Hopper heard its music as he painted, moving with the heat of coffee and the conversational silences of company. Sometimes there's nothing one can do with the dark notes but take them to Jesus, or what light there is, and step inside. So I do, a stranger thinking private thoughts at the long end of the counter, wrapped in the self-estrangement of poems. No doctrine I can explain allows for both, inside the diner and out. Skepticism wrapped in faith. My poem come round to its ground note. My heresy is believing music lasts. I burn with it even now. Thank you. That's my one.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to hear you. Next, John Simmons, what do you got for us?
Hi, thanks, Al, and Nina, Bill, everybody. This is called Road Rulers Retreat, and it's about the sort of about the traffic here in Honolulu, which can be fairly intense. Road Rulers Retreat. Jaguars were once all the rage on our roads. Sleek, dark metals glinting everywhere. Sometimes it seemed a half dozen cruised by in impressive view, shiny radiator sculptures darting with jungle outreach from hoods of passing, trailing, oncoming traffic, channeling search for island prey, to pass with satisfied looks of pride and maybe some fuel-injected disdain for those of us in our Chevy Geo Prisms. The 90s were Jaguar's years of feline prancing on our busy, worn highways, 3 lanes westbound toward town, 3 more heading east homeward. Dealers confided the Jaguar craze sprang to life from tweedy Brit envy, the spotted stealth of Latin tropics, and showroom deals at 0 down. But then the trend subsided. A shift in reverse, vaguely explained, linked in time with ownership change from America's Ford to India's Tata, discreet grumbles of costly repair. I've rarely seen a Jaguar in recent years and wonder why the breed dwindled from its reign on our brand-conscious roads. Though island motorists seem kind and signal sensitive to cautious cats like me, our reputation suffers from results of national research. Worst in the nation, said Forbes' advisor in a strange self-survey of 100 drivers from each state. Undeserved, in my opinion, except for those behind me at a red stoplight, right turn lane, revving past me on the left as I edge out into traffic, sensing the impatience in their roaring overdrive, but never beeping, of course, a major social no-no here. It's simply not done. Bad form and all that old sport, I might say, if steering a Jaguar wheel. But I drive a 6-year-old Honda, which might be a quieter rage of sorts, since so many occupy space in our big grocery parking lot, a sight more risky at times to drive or to walk than rush hour roadways. I flash my hazard lights now as I back out slowly from slender spots, knowing other cars and walkers with carts may suddenly loom into range. Laws of each state differ on when it's okay to launch flashers. I use mine always in edging through zones pedestrian rich with other motorized creatures, slow folks on phones, and Gen Zs from the beach, Pareu wrapping bikinis as they slipper rush to the store. It's a bit of a jungle out there, and the fearsome jaguar is gone, somewhat like India's tigers, fiercely proud, but not good at survival, unable to learn the lessons of sheepish drivers who keep lights of caution blinking to warn and restrain, in lieu of an elegant beast to seize command of the road. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next, let's listen to Stephanie Trenchard, who's with us for the first time. Good to meet you.
Hi, thank you. Wow, I love that.
Before you start, Stephanie, I just want to throw in for everyone who, most people here, well, maybe not Lee, are familiar with After Hours magazine, which I publish, and I just wanted to mention that Stephanie is our featured writer in this issue, the current issue.
Which is a huge honor for me. I'm kind of an emerging poet. I'm a full-time artist, but emerging as a poet. So thank you, Al. I'll just start. Color as language. It has an epigraph. The epigraph is, "Death flashed her brights at me. She was driving straight into the sun," by Jory Graham. Consequence, 3 Latin syllables with a Q at the center, tethering a sequence, one event causing another to occur in the light of day, feels like yellow to orange, red being the event. Sable, like caramel, is a splendid name for a color I don't use much, preferring to consume colors like chocolate and coffee and oatmeal, or visualize a chestnut horse in the stable of my image bank. Banking is an Oxford blue, a powder hue, a power clue, royal and primary, more intimidating than cobalt, steel, Dutch, cerulean, or even azure, which has a greenish cast and is often used in poetry, in ars poetica cliché. A blade of grass in phthalo or sap, viridian or olive, cinnabar, chartreuse, emerald, veronese, chromium oxide, the vast green gamut of tubes on my tabouret spill onto the others and cut a line in the foreground. But gold green is queen, a beautiful and flexible pigment, as she opens herself with the slightest touch of medium, creating an ethereal and wholly transparent glow, a luscious layer. Courbet green, perfect for copses and groves, but also makes me blush when I recall his painting, Origin of the World, his Beaux-Arts cropped portrait of a vagina. Periscope and perimenopause are clearly periwinkle, a gradient that washes to a watery purple, navigating the depths of love and sex, going indigo as night falls. Payne's gray is the deadliest hue, a sort of blue, the best shade for the ocean depth, the eye's iris, the water in a marsh, capable of implying immensity and mystery a moment. Death flashed her brights is cadmium yellow with zinc white highlights, resonant and spooky, alternating to a glowy amber orange, like being alive in the dark. Thank you. Here's one. I'm also, I work with glass a lot. So, I mean, that's kind of my full-time job. So here's one about glass. And it's called Glass. Amber oceans cool to clear blues as honey motion settles into stillness, toggling between dimensions, concave or convex. Molecules organize and unite in plain sight. Trapped air does not recede but pushes to the surface, a race against the measure of heat. Textures, bumps and lumps, stingers, seeds, all reveal a surface, the fourth wall. A sudden chill, a tempering, a shock ensuring form. Checks play with light in a chromatic way, a portent of things to crack open. Stereo vision, meaning breath, meaning a heartbeat, a figure exhales as optics create animation, eyes that follow, shoulders that relax and adjust. Blowers and casters, jacks or shears, the Italian tools, beeswax and cherry wood, the molten orange glow, all in the heat that warms the marrow, the liquid magic of material. From Egypt, Syria, Venice, Prague, Toledo, Wisconsin, the birth of the Milky Way. It may save us from the seas of plastic while it also burns its candle white hot. Thank you. And can I read one more short one?
A short one. Yeah,
Okay. Is that okay, or should I pass?
I think it's okay.
Okay. So this is the poem. I'm trying to write a poem for my daughter's wedding, and which is coming up soon. So inspired wedding poem for Maddie and Quinn I plan to write. I will write a poem in 3 stanzas, the last word of the first and last being falling. The flanking stanzas will be fleeting between quasars and murmurations. There will be images to elicit songwriting, birdwatching, and cross-stitching. In the middle, magenta, a decadence in 3 syllables, symbolizing joy, a hunger to live fully, kindness, laughter, and beauty, affection, coffee, and snacks. I will mention movements like running and biking, embracing love and doing love, all the parts of falling.
Ah.
So,
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You'll come again next month.
And thanks everybody for listening.
Great. Next up, Bill Harrison, are you going to read for us tonight?
I indeed am. Thank you, Al. And I suppose I should apologize in advance. This is prose. This is a fable called Clarence and the Princess. The number 3 CTA bus spits Clarence out and deposits him near the intersection of Michigan and Jackson like a wad of exhausted bazooka, its taste and color long gone. Seen from across the street, it appears as though the bus has kicked him to the curb, literally. Though Clarence is in his early 30s, he looks indeterminately older. He has the pallor of someone for whom the light of day is a rare adventure. His clothes are, what's the opposite of stylish? And his Brillo pad hair looks as though it hasn't been disturbed by a comb since the Bears last won the Super Bowl. Well, let's not leave our unprepossessing hero languishing on the pavement. Clarence regains his balance with the grace of a goat on ice and finds himself heading north on Michigan Avenue. He looks up from his shuffling feet at the precise moment when, out of sheer dumb luck, he makes eye contact with a woman loping down the street on what appears to be a collision course. This isn't just any woman. Oh no, this woman is magnificent. She's statuesque, with glowing ebony skin, fashionably dressed in a pressed honey brown t-shirt that leaves nothing to the imagination, and a pair of black hip-hugging designer jeans. She exudes the primal sensuality and confidence of an Egyptian princess. So let's call her Nefertiti. Are you picturing her skin-tight tee and spectacular figure? Good. Emblazoned across Nefertiti's chest in what must be 75-point type is the word Mounds. Yes, that's the brand name of the iconic American confection, consisting of soft coconut wrapped in rich dark chocolate. And underneath are the words, indescribably delicious, unwrap paradise. Oh, that wicked Nefertiti, she's got some sense of humor. Clarence's eyes bug out cartoonishly. He imagines the woman heading straight toward him must be a goddess who's descended to earth for some as yet unknown heavenly purpose. The seconds tick by, their eyes remain locked. Clarence has the impulse to prostrate himself at her feet. Too late. Nefertiti towers over him. She slips an elegant hand into one of her back pockets and withdraws a piece of parchment. Well, paper, actually. You look like someone who could use this, she breathes, as she hands Clarence the wrinkled bit of paper. Their fingers graze one another's ever so briefly. He nearly faints. Wait, what? He starts to ask, glancing at the mysterious missive. Does it contain ancient runes or hieroglyphics or, glory be to God, her phone number? Clarence looks up, but Nefertiti is already gliding down the street, no doubt on a mission to bless some other wayfaring stranger and out of his life forever. Clarence examines the paper he is grasping so reverently between thumb and forefinger. Oh, no. No, it can't be. But it is. It's a goddamn CTA bus transfer, and it expired 15 minutes ago. Once again, Clarence feels the urge to sink to his knees, this time out of abject disappointment. But he doesn't. Our hero straightens himself up, flings the useless scrap of paper to the sidewalk, and strides resolutely in the direction of his future, wherever it may take him. Thank you.
That's pretty good. She said, you're getting hearts on somebody's screen, but that's damn good. You know, this piece has come such a long way, and well done. I'm a little biased, but and therefore, let's see, Al, are there any announcements we should make? Let's start with money. So we used to be able to pass the hat back in the live days, and we can't do that now, but we do like to pay our features. And that's where you come in. There is a link somewhere in the chat or wherever it shows up. That link will allow you to donate using PayPal, and it'll go to Al's after hours website, and then he'll split it up and send it out to our features. And hopefully it'll be a lot, although it probably won't. But
But anyway, I
we'd
will.
like you to be generous. And so saying, let's move on to the next.
Yeah, I'm about to put that link into the chat on YouTube for all our friends out in YouTube land.
All right, now then, who have we left? Robbie Nestor. Robbie.
Gonna move on. I hope to appear again. Here we are. All right, I've got a couple of poems. This one has an epigraph from Paul Edelward. It's called What Lights the Room. There's another world, and it's in this one, Paul Edelward. That evening, the pool across the road lit the room a melancholy blue, insistent as the moon, carved claw of light, just then entering the window frame. The ghostly hue convinced me the world was much more than it seemed. I already knew the things I gathered in my rooms were just pretending to be insensible. I only had to catch them at it, like the figure emerging under the sculptor's knife, here an eye, there an arm, hair breaking loose from the thick wood, like a river finally undammed. Sometimes I watched the cat, entangled in a skein of dreams, her white paws twitching, Was she stalking a secret trail of scent, gradually widening to a river, the opening to a den where some elusive creature stirred? I couldn't see or hear it, but she waited there, hoping for it to emerge. I stalk that something too, when I sit, pen poised over an empty page, with all the words to choose from and the breath to give them life. The second one, I was asked to edit my friend Judy Cronenfeld's hybrid book of essays and poems. And the book's called Apartness, in case you can't see it, and it was published by Inlandia in California. So the poem's called Tradition for Judy Cronenfeld. My parents had already drifted from tradition, taught me next to nothing of the rules their parents and their parents lived by, the complicated dietary prohibitions demanding cabinets to spare, 2 refrigerators, 2 sets of silverware. They left behind the laws enforcing separation, the holy from the secular, forbidden from the blessed, our people from all others. At synagogue, their mothers and grandmothers were herded behind the makitza. They couldn't see or hear. Men kept them penned like goats, stifling in the summer, cold in winter, far from the hearth, fearing pious men would be drawn away from prayer by a seductive nape, golden down above an uncovered wrist. I was American, which meant the old prayers came to me only through an open window, chanted in a tongue I did not understand. Yet my father still believed that educating women was a waste, while my mother fed the flame of my obsessions with the kindling of her mother's whispered wishes. I too had something to pass down. I learned to light the candles, studied the old books, taught my son to recognize the one day of the week, 1 week of the year when we eat matzah instead of bread and sing of freedom and redemption. I know that he will teach this to his child, even without truly knowing what it means. It's a great book, really.
Thank you, Robbie. Okay, next, Caroline Wellman. Good to see you.
Hi, Al. Hi, Nina. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So in the last few years, I've written a lot about losing my parents because I lost both of them. My mother, not unexpectedly, my dad unexpectedly to COVID in 2020. So a lot of my writing is about that. This first poem is called Looking for the 50 Words for Mourning. Where are they, the words for how grief knots you up? Where is the link between ghost, gust, and guest to help us believe our gone loves are yet constant visitors? English has almost nothing that serves, except for lamentation, which wails so much more than the verb, taking us back to Wycliffe's Bible in 1382. Not much else, except maybe inconsolable, that sense of being beyond all solace and comfort. Blue, too mild, should hit like a pool you dive into in late October, the cold that leaves you gasping even when you only wade in. There's Dollar, though the Spanish Dolorosa is prettier, if you want to dress it all up in its Sunday best, as if for a funeral. This brings us to mourning as unending road, the pain of the penitentes walking on their knees. There's tears, though the Latin lacrimose is more poignant, calling to mind the mimosa tree, its ephemeral feathery blossoms, but also its roots, rough and tenacious. Mourning is unkillable sadness. But where are the words for mourning as knife, mourning as winter, mourning as cement shoes, much less mourning as the moment that feels like a hand on your shoulder, snatched away too soon? I also have a short one. I've never been really great with titles. Um, so this is called Confession. I have stood a long time at the grave of the brother I never knew, to watch a spider's filament stretched between our grandfather's stone and his, to see it reel in the breeze and turn colors in the last sun, because it was this brother's birthday, because the strand was not there the day before. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's nice to have you. And I think well, I don't think we're gonna have Kurt Heinz, an old friend, be our cleanup hitter for the open mic.
All right. Thanks, Nina. And thanks, Al. And it's good to be back among friends. And definitely looking forward to Lee and Rachel's set to come shortly. Carolyn, this is not exactly a nod to you, but I'm going to dial it back to a little bit before death. And also cross that with my experience during the pandemic of having watched too much Perry Mason. It sounds funny, and it isn't always. So they drag me out about 7:30. Expect me to shit, and I usually do. Get me back into bed, then bring the oatmeal. Usually oatmeal. I started checking when the sugar came. More often when I had a good shit, but not always. Not good at keeping records, but that's my guess. I keep Darla's picture on the wall above me. I miss her. She was fine until a week or so before she went. Brought her here, no place the hospital much. Knew what was going to happen with her there. She shared the room with the lady across the hall. Saw her every day. Still think of her. Oatmeal done, the TV comes on. Always a mystery. Never see the lawyer until it's at least a quarter done. But Mr. Mason, you've got to believe me. I'm telling you the truth. And there you go. Chug another one. I figured out the code. Poison, fingerprints, registered pistol, fireplace poker, blood type 2. Like a factory. Interchangeable parts. But the police guy, if it's not blood, he always puts his mark on it. If they say they could kill somebody, obviously they didn't. But somebody else did and framed them. How it always is. Just watch. You'll see. It's full of sleazebag women, what they call wasp waists, like the cha-cha dance teacher. Wouldn't touch them. Shyster businessmen, pompadour haircuts. Wouldn't fuck with them either. Fucked up teen kids, but always in clean haircuts, always in Perry Como sweaters. None of that Beatles crap. Rich-ass in-laws, overspent and overserved, still greedy. Seen them all at least 5 times now. Same for the actors, too. Same 20 or 30 actors each year. Just different roles. Always gets a confession at the end, too. Right there on the stand. As if. I'm a regular viewer, right? Then come cowboys. Then maybe news. Nixon in trouble again. Always. And the day's done. Funny how folks don't get it. They bring the cancer people in with smiles, prayers too. I smile when I hear them, but I know how it goes. Neither of them ever last. Like a rerun, more shysters. It's over. It's over for them before it's on. You can watch.
All right then. When he comes, he knocks it out of the park. So Al, break time. Well, it's not really a break time. It's a shifting time, at
Yes.
which time we make any announcements that we have on hand. Next month. We're going to have Jan Beatty. I hope I pronounced her name right, Jan Beatty. And Lisa Marie Bassel. Again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, but I sure as heck like her poetry. And also watch the chat, because we're going to have links to websites and books of the features who you're going to get to hear right now. Al, anything that I'm not saying?
No, that you got next month. That's the announcement. Just a reminder to the folks in YouTube land that we have our Pass the Hat link is out there. So help us make sure we say thank you to our featured readers.
Sounds good. All right, so we are going to start with Lee Herrick. Lee is the California Poet Laureate now. He's the, and thank you for joining us, Lee. He's the author of 4 books, including In Praise of Late Wonder, New and Selected Poems, on Gunpowder Press. He co-edited The World I Leave You, Asian American Poets on Faith and Spirit and Afterlives, an Agni portfolio of Asian adoptee diaspora writing. Born in, hope I get this right, Daejeon, Korea, and adopted to the United States at 10 months. He lives and teaches in Fresno, California. He's the 10th California Poet Laureate and the first Asian American to serve in the role. Lee, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you very much for having me, and Al as well. And to all of the open mic readers, thank you. Those poems were wonderful. And Rachel, I'm really happy to be doing this with you. So yeah, and everybody watching, before I read, I wanted to just say that wherever you are, I know we're in different places. I happen to be in Central California. I just wanted to say that I hope you're well. I would typically say that, but it feels particularly, at least for me, it feels necessary to say that, given the condition of things and the state of things lately. So I hope you're well and that you can take care of yourselves. So I'm going to read from my new book. It's called In Praise of Late Wonder, and it just came out in September. And it's got a lot of poems in it that have to do with my adoption, more than I've ever written about my adoption from Korea. So I'm going to try to bookend this reading with a couple of prose poems. And then I don't know why I'm excited about this, but I'm going to read a poem I've never read. It's very new as well. So this is titled Home. Home is the space around your heart, like a moat, so that the space in your heart or your spirit can have room to breathe, to be and become more of who you are. We know at a young age what hurts, rocks, being ignored. And over time, our sense of home changes, but we must always protect it, our identities, what we know to be most true. Within that, there's a lot of space, in my home at least, for discovery or risk or exploration. And one could say that's a class or economic luxury, and they'd be right. But I'd say space is always important. Space in your heart, room in your mind. When I say I might have missed my birth mother and father every day of my life, I mean that as a person of color raised in a white family, I was constantly and acutely aware of physical difference and what that could mean. Along with home and country and family and language, as a child, I was separated from the right to grieve. Adoption as a one-dimensional, one-way avenue toward gratitude and fortune is illogical and harmful. I recently read a book by a noted novelist whose father died when she was in her 50s. She was understandably grieving. She said, "How do I continue with such an absence?" I thought, here is the adopted person's situation from infancy. This loss, this massive absence is thrust upon them from the moment of separation. I call it an inverted grief thrust upon the adoptee. Home is where you are understood or loved or able to be weird, strange, confused, your lost self, your full human self. Mostly I felt at home. Sometimes I felt so alone I could almost vanish. Okay, this is titled Acclamation. My first language was the ocean. It sounded like my first mother's body. Wave, storm, vanish. I love what wind does to the trees. I want nature to move me like that. My name is a song. In it, there are horses, fed by a man who says, I feel American when I kill a row of ants and say they asked for it. We are this many miles from desire. We are immigrant turned imperialist. I love what wind does to the bay. Wave to me. Smile at me like you know my name, like you love the ocean too, or at least the way I glisten in the moonlight. Okay, so I think I'll read. This is the title poem. I was writing a lot of sonnets. I don't know if that's a question that all poets get. What's your favorite form? But the Petrarchan sonnet, especially, is one that I love. So this is the title poem, and it's a sonnet, title poem of the book called In Praise of Late Wonder. I've wondered what my Korean mother's voice sounded like when I was born. Was it gasp, hiss, or flag in light wind? I've wondered if she kissed me before I became a wind, a white noise in blue sky. I've wondered lately about joy, butterfly, hummingbird, angels so full of bliss they almost sing. I imagine some of this relates to the orphan I was, the adopted boys and girls like me, all diaspora and alarm. I've wondered if I'm made of smoke and fire, sometimes clear sky, sometimes quiet storm. I've wondered lately how the acoustic guitar keeps its secrets, makes me float a little higher. How could I not love looking at the stars? Okay. So, um, I'll read one more kind of along those lines. I First few times I read this, I said, I hope this doesn't offend anyone. And then I realized nobody's really offended by this poem. So I'm just going to stop saying that. So this is called 10 Statements for the Committee. 1, if I were to believe my education and my media, I was erasure after erasure until I was almost erased. 2, I feel American listening to A Tribe Called Quest or Yeah, Yeah, Yeahs more than any Bruce Springsteen song. 3, that is to say birthright, that is to say imperial, that is to say violence and coup is when I feel sadness filling up my mouth. 4, I'm tired of Hollywood white heroism. 5, in my Hollywood, it so happens the main character can be 2 things at once, Asian and heroic. 6, I've seen thousands of brown people saving the day. 7, I was born in Korea and adapted. 8, what we need, we've always had. The museums inside of us. 9, in the end, farmers and librarians will save us. 10, meet me in the field or the library. I'll wait for you. Okay, so it's so great, but so bizarre reading like this, you know. I know this is the norm and we're all used to this, but I can't be the only one here whose memory takes him or her or them back to a time before computers, before CDs, before cassettes. Do you know? Um, and I was thinking about sounds that we just no longer hear. I have a hearing condition. I realized just about 5 years ago. Um, Being an adoptee, I don't have access to my medical records, so I never knew what it was. But it was so great to learn what this is, I felt more normal. It's sort of that feeling that is difficult when you realize you have this condition, but at the same time, it's sort of good because you know what it's called, you know what it is. So I was thinking about sounds I just no longer hear, and so this is the poem that came from that, and it's a couple of sonnets also. It's called Partial Crown in Praise of Absent Sounds. I want the fax machine, the dot matrix buzzsaw of news across the wire, the young woman's lisp and fire during solo moonlight road trips, the shuffle of predictable card tricks, the acoustic chord like sweet desire, the rotary dial and pronunciation error. When I say absent sounds, I mean typewriter key as much as Anyo or Ye, the 8-track plunk as much as Korean vowels drawn out at the end like a plain blue sky. I want to know the way home. There's not much more I need. Home. There's not much more I need except to know how much blue sky there is from here to you. Why I sometimes hear your voice, freed, wild, true. Please, take the lead. At times, I thought I was going to die. At times, fire. At other times, firefly. My daughter was 4 at the art gallery and called it the art galaxy, a malapropism I wish existed. Star, sonnet, serenade. I want the mispronunciation, broken rhythm, and scratched record, survivor wisdom, a mother's prayer for her son who stayed perfectly still when she left and kissed him. Okay, so I'm going to read this poem. This is a new poem. And I'll just say that it's going to be in an anthology called Poetry Goes to the Movies, edited by the great LA poet Suzanne Lummis. It's going to be published through Beyond Baroque Books and their imprint. And there's some fantastic poets in it and some marvelous poems, all talking about some aspect of film. And so the poem that I contributed is on the film called Parasite. Uh, I hope some of you may have heard of it, maybe seen it, but it won Best Picture from the Oscars in 2019 and Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. It's also a Korean language film, so um, this poem references the film a bit, but I hope it holds up even if you haven't seen the film. So this is called One Who Eats at the Table of Another after Parasite. We've all needed someone to live, to feed us, nurse us, to want us, to keep us from our fatal allergy. In one scene, we fake our name. In another, we angle for free Wi-Fi, open windows for free fumigation. In one scene, Da Song's self-portrait of madness or the basement dweller. The young boy knows he isn't crazy. Haven't we all needed someone to understand us and our wild idea? In the basement, a husband in hiding. In the stairwell, a blunt rock to the head. Parasitism is the most common survival strategy in the world. Of the 8 million species on Earth, almost half are parasitic. We invent and reinvent ourselves, a new name, day by day, line by line, to make belief where there was none, to eat at the table of the host. Invention is a survival skill. You be the tutor, she'll be the maid. He'll be the rich man's driver. She'll be Jessica, only child, Illinois, Chicago. Haven't we all needed a song to become who we need to be? Corporate, parasite, hypocrite, socialite. Don't the wealthy feed off the poor, drained of their energy, made to wait longer, search harder, fold more pizza boxes per hour? In one scene, I could be everyone and no one, in love with the violent end, the murderer stuck in the basement of his own making. Someone new will come by this house. Someone new will tend to the yard. You be the mythic architect. I'll be the dark-skinned farmer surviving. Okay, so I don't know. It's hard to say, but it felt good reading. Who knows? I'm here in my living room by myself. I'm so grateful for this, Nina and Al. I'm going to read one more, but I just wanted to say thank you. I'm super
You want to make
excited.
I do want to
What-
make a suggestion. I don't know if you're on gallery view, but if you were on gallery view, you'd be able to see all the appreciative faces of at least those in the open mic, and then you don't feel like you're reading to the screen.
That's
I'm
nice,
glad we're
Nina.
going to hear
Thank
one
you.
more.
I actually am on gallery view, but I'm doing my best. But thank you, Nina, and thank you for having me and super happy to be doing this with Rachel. And again, I hope you're all going to take care. This last poem is a prose poem. It's the last poem in this little section about my adoption. It's called Stars. Every now and then, I remember that I was born on the other side of the earth, and it makes sense that I love looking up at the stars. It's such a childish thing to do, like climbing trees or stomping in puddles, building forts out of blankets. But there's some strange pull and simple satisfaction from looking at the stars after all these years. I wonder if a man my age in Korea has the same love. I wonder how the stars relate to a gravitational likelihood that I'll tell my daughter someday about the time in our backyard, swimming in the moonlight, and the world seemed perfect. Or the time I dropped her off at her middle school in Fresno, and before I drove off, she motioned for me to stop and fogged up the window with her breath and wrote with her finger, "I love you, Dad," with a heart, and the world seemed perfect. That's what it is about the stars. Because they are so many millions of miles away and so still, the immediate chaos or confusion of our lives seems so minor. Even in the daylight, they're right there, imperceptible, but there. Something like faith or belief or the wild idea that a deep kind of joy is there for you, even if you have no idea where it is. Thank you. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
What a beautiful and gentle and generous reading. Thank you. I am now going to introduce Rachel Robbins. Rachel received her MFA from the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. She's a tenured assistant professor at the City Colleges of Chicago, a visual artist and two-time Pushcart Prize nominated writer. Her paintings have materialized on public transit, children's daycare centers, and Chicago's Magnificent Mile. She's the author of In Lieu of Flowers, available through Tortoise Books, and The Sound of 1,000 Stars, available from Alcove Press. Penguin Random House Audio and Hodder and Stoughton, an imprint of Hatchet UK. She lives in Chicago with her husband, children, and Portuguese water dog. So, are we ready?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
And for it, yeah.
Hey, I'm gonna put the link in the chat to the book. Hold on 1 second. I should have been prepared. I had all this time to think about it, right? So first of all, I just want to thank you guys so much for having me. This is such a pleasure, and to hear all of your beautiful poetry, so inspiring. And I have to admit, I'm having a bit of imposter syndrome, because I am planning to read from my novel, which is not poetry, it's prose. But it did begin as a poem, and it was actually in the poetry book you mentioned in the intro, Nina. It was one of the characters in that book kind of morphed into this novel. So it had initially sections that were poetry that eventually in the editing process got removed, but I feel like the heart of it is still poetry. I want to also say, Lee, that you are not an easy act to follow. Thank you for your beautiful reading. That was so moving. And I'm gonna go think about Art Galaxy now for the next year. That's such an amazing, especially because I have a 4-year-old and an 8-month-old who are in the throes of bedtime right now. So I was real nervous about how this was about to go, but so far so good. we have quiet, so, bear with me. But so I'm going to read a little bit from my book. This is The Sound of a Thousand Stars. It came out in October. And in order to kind of understand, because there's a lot of backstory in the story behind the story. So my book is kind of positioned as Oppenheimer meets Hidden Figures. It's inspired by my grandparents' true story, which is that my grandfather was one of the physicists who worked on the atomic bomb, and my grandmother followed him to Los Alamos, didn't know what he was building, and he didn't tell her, and she actually figured it out while they were pregnant, and they were guessing baby names that they might want to use. And she, for some reason, their last name was Fisher, and for some reason she said, how about we name the baby Atomic? Which of course was a code word you couldn't use. And Atomic Fisher, he stormed out of the room. Atomic Fisher was apparently too close to atomic fission. And so then she went and looked up atomic fission, figured out what they were building, and then wrote a book about it. And so that was kind of the legacy I was born into. And so I wanted to do something as a testament to this really amazing woman I grew up with. And as I was researching, I've been working with the archives and the Historical Society and really involved in kind of saving and preserving their story for future generations. As I was going through all that, I came across all of these stories of these amazing women scientists. And they, of course, called them women scientists because scientist was presumed to be male. And one of my favorites of those was Norma Gross, who until recently was incorrectly recorded in history as Norman Gross, presumed to be male. And so I felt like it was almost a more true testament to my grandmother to fictionalize and tell the story of one of these women scientists. So that's how I have Alice, my main character. And so this is The Sound of a Thousand Stars, which is, the title is, of course, a nod to, Oppenheimer's quoting of the Bhagavad Gita, the night after the Trinity test, right? The light of a thousand suns, right? It's also what Fred J. Olivey said famously on the evening news after Boxcar dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki. He said, suddenly the light of a thousand suns illuminated the cockpit. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to read a little bit from like different sections. So you guys get a sense of the different characters because there's three main storylines. So I'll begin with Alice, and this is my preface, my prologue, and it is July 16th, 1945, which you will most likely, super popularized now because the Oppenheimer movie, the night of the Trinity test. Alice. Alice Katz did not exist. She was a rumor holding a stopwatch. In 12 seconds, she would be lost to all of history, swallowed up by New Mexico. T-12, T-11, T-10. She heard Sam Allison's familiar voice counting down. She surveyed the network of crisscrossed wires entangling her in the cottage, an elaborate spider web. She fidgeted with the Geiger counter on the windowsill and adjusted the dial on the short-wave radio, trying to tune away the static. Alice had passed the witchy hours while New Mexico slept, studying the storm through the window, trying to see the empty desert through sheets of rainwater. When the night sky quieted, residual raindrops rolled slowly down the window pane, and her mind recited theories of cohesion and adhesion as she watched the water molecules interact. Water is attracted to water, she mumbled. Water is attracted to other substances. She thought about how, in outer space, raindrops would be perfectly round spheres. But here on Earth, gravity weighed down the shapes into teardrops. Here on Earth, she thought, that phrase might mean something very different soon. T-9, T-8, T-7. Sam counted through the radio. Alice felt like some mythological beast with two beating hearts. The fetus was already the size of a laboratory beaker, and it was growing. She had heard once, somewhere, that pregnant mothers were at once one and also two. T-6, T-5. The radio stuttered into white noise. She braced, knowing that in a matter of seconds, either a second sun would rise on the horizon, or it would be the end of the world. At the edges of her vision, she noticed that the trees were shining gold. Thank you. And Lee, I can so relate because it's almost like PTSD from teaching on Zoom during COVID. The like, does anyone have anything to say? And then everyone's muted. But thank you. I love seeing your faces. Okay, I'm going to read a section. So in writing this book, I didn't know that the Oppenheimer movie was going to come out. I've been working on this for a decade. And one criticism, I went back and forth a lot with whether or not I could or should include a Japanese perspective. Like, I felt that I could write the Jewish woman in STEM perspective. I could do that. I didn't know that I had the agency or authority to tell this other story, but I felt that it needed to be in there. And one of the criticisms of the Oppenheimer movie that really stuck with me is that it was a 3.5 hour epic of the telling of the atomic bomb that didn't feature a single Japanese person. And so I actually got back in touch with one of my oldest childhood friends, who had moved to California, where I grew up, in kindergarten, and she was from Tokyo, and we became best friends. And she didn't speak a word of English. We just chased each other around on the playground, which to me is like magical. And then she moved back in high school and like kind of disappeared from my life. And so we got back in touch, and I asked her to read and help me. And she went, oh my goodness, I didn't know that your grandfather had worked on the atomic bomb. My grandfather lived in Hiroshima, and was sent away on business the week of the bombing, and so survived, and therefore I'm alive, right? And we had spent our entire lives being friends and never discussed it. And so that's when I was like, you know what, I really need this to be in there. And so I based my story, this is Haruki Sato's story, this character, based very closely on the writing of Tsuneyo Tsuboi, who was a survivor. Hibakusha is the word in Japanese, because they needed to invent a word for, this generation of people who were kind of doomed to live out the rest of their lives suffering the after effects of radiation poisoning. And he was an amazing advocate for peace. He was the co-chair of an organization called the Nihon Hidenkyo, which recently, and gosh, it feels like a long time ago now because the news it feels like years ago, but just before the election, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And yet, in that awarding of the Peace Prize, he had died 3 years previously, and so he didn't live to see the recognition of his life's work. And this awarding of the prize was a sort of political nod to like, hey, we need to pay attention to the cataloging of survivor stories, right? More now than ever. And it feels as though it's been washed away now in what's happened since. And the dangers of atomic weapons is a very real threat, And so anyways, this is Haruki Sato's story, which is told in reverse. And so here we are in April of 1969. A story told backward. Blinded by the bright lights, Haruki recited an old kamikaze song to calm himself. We load fuel for a one-way trip while crying. Our destination is Ryukyu, our journey to the other side. Sometimes, when his fear of making public appearances got the better of him, he recited the song like it was a prayer. When he took the stage, Haruki feared that everyone was staring at his scars. Never having fully grown back, his eyebrows were penciled in. His left ear was missing, and only the helix of his ear canal remained, so strangers could peer into the cavity of his head like a seashell. The keloid scars that marred his chest had always reminded him of the scrawled cursive of some alien language. Consequently, he wore his shirt collar buttoned all the way up, concealing further overgrowths of scar tissue and protrusions on his skin. He had combed his hair aggressively, streaks of silver and strands so white they looked blue. His eyes were milky from cataracts. His vision was misty. He couldn't make out the faces in the audience at the International Atomic Energy Agency conference, but he could sense that there were many bodies in that packed lecture hall. Outside, the boats drifted by on the brackish water of the Chicago River, hundreds of feet below. He got dizzy, walking the platform to the stage. He couldn't back out now, not with the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons on the line. When he finally spoke into the microphone, he used lots of gesticulations. He insisted on standing despite his health. He suffered from chronic aplastic anemia, angina, cancer of the large intestine, and prostate cancer, all directly linked to his radiation exposure 24 years earlier. He was on a vitamin B complex and vitamin B12 drip every fortnight for fatigue, metabolism, and neurological function, as well as a blood-forming medicine and nitroglycerin. He stared out at the sea of faces beyond the blinding edges of the spotlight. After the bomb fell, he began in faltering English, nodding at the startled interpreter who slowly found a seat. I spent 40 days lying unconscious, then a year of immobility with bed sores. 3 times I was pronounced, what is the term? medically dead. He laughed softly, but in the audience, nobody stirred. To this day, doctors are shocked that I am alive. When the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, a new word was needed in Japanese to describe the people who'd survived. There was no sufficient label for the half-dead population that was doomed to spend the rest of their lives suffering from radiation poisoning, living on borrowed time. They were waiting out the clock, doomed to join their loved ones who had died at ground zero. The word hibakusha was given to these ghosts, meaning explosion-affected people. Haruki was among the last of them. I fear that too many hibakusha are dying, Haruki said, looking right into the clicking camera lens. He had lived 24 years longer than he was meant to, and he was trying not to let the fatigue show on his face. I'm going to skip ahead here. So I'm actually going to go back to where we began with that prologue section, the eve of the Trinity test, but tell it from a different character's perspective. So this is now, again, July 16th, 1945, but this is Caleb, one of the male scientists who is very closely based on my grandfather. So there's a lot of insight. My family's members, as they read this, are like, oh yeah, that was Zeta. But I also have to explain, in order for this to make sense, that one of the other characters in the book is Richard Feynman. And you may be familiar with him. He's pretty, well-known, famous physicist who is, controversial, to say the least. I mean, he was known for, among other achievements with the atomic bomb, he was the person who demonstrated very publicly what went wrong with the Challenger explosion, right? And like really kind of stuck it to NASA. Really impressive kind of ideas about him as a sort of being touted as a genius, which is, as we know now, a very flawed, problematic term that was unequally applied to men, especially men in science. And so he was, in the syndicated Big Bang Theory, TV show, he's one of the characters idolizes him, and he was the face of the Apple's Think Different campaign. However, if he were around today, he would have been Me Too'd. He, famously made students meet him in a strip club to get their grades. He was interested in drawing and made them pose nude for him. He posed as an undergrad and had, tricked young undergrads on campus into sleeping with him. His wife cited abuse. So it's an interesting thing because I spent a lot of time in my classes saying, can you love the art and hate the artist? And with Feynman, it's a question of sort of, can you love the science but hate the scientist? And yet I wanted to be aware of, there's this term presentism, which is when you write about historical figures, we tend to imbue them with our own kind of contemporary ethics. So I wanted to write him as an 20-something, a young person whose wife is dying, because she was. And see if I could do that service. So Dick Feynman in this section is Richard Feynman, young, not aware of the direction his life is taking. So this is July 16th, 1945. At 5:30 a.m., 5 men threw the safety switches and sprinted for their Jeeps. One by one, everyone at base camp shielded their eyes with wellness glasses, except for Dick. Dick, Caleb nudged him, you'll go blind. Dick continued to stare hard at the horizon. And Caleb realized that was the point. His friend was heartbroken. Arlene had weeks left at best. To him, the world was ending, whether the test worked or not. No wonder he had thrown himself so relentlessly into this work that would precipitate Armageddon. It was suicide. They all lay face down in the sand, turned 180 degrees away from the blast for safety. It looked like a war zone. Suddenly, an otherworldly white light filled the sky from corner to corner. It pulsed. The dark of night transformed into the light of morning. The light was so blinding that Caleb was certain they had miscalculated and blown up the world. Then came a sudden blast, so intense they all covered their heads with their hands. Even through his dark glasses, Caleb had never seen anything so bright. It took nearly 40 seconds before the detonation hit him like a strong gust of wind. A mass of flames rose in the distance. Even from 10 miles away, he could feel the heat on the exposed parts of his skin. There were flashes contained inside the massive fireball of heat and ignition. The fire pooled into a pillar of smoke with a horrific mushroom shape, casting an evil shadow over the morning. A full minute and a half later, an enormous bang ricocheted off the mountains, the world's first man-made thunder. Caleb stared at the dust clouds shimmering outward in concentric rings like rippling water. The shape reminded him of the body's circulatory system, bicycle tires in the mud, tree rings in the woods, the weeping rings inside an onion, and the yolk sac in Alice's womb. He struggled to see his own hands and feet in the ash it kicked up, but it was like he had no body. He'd become the dark cloud. For many hours after, Caleb saw a purple splotch after image. For days, he saw that purple splotch every time he closed his eyes. And for many months, before he fell asleep at night, he heard Oppenheimer mumbling in Sanskrit as those final seconds ticked down. The good deeds a man has done before defend him. Okay, you said 20 minutes. I always feel like you should stop leaving people wanting more, right? Not less. Maybe I will just read my author's note because it kind of explains a little bit of the story behind the story.
You know, if I had my druthers, you said there was a poem that kind of was at the beginning of your writing this?
Yeah, I would have to go pull it out of the other room. It's in my other book. So I had my In Lieu of Flowers, which was titled for Memorial, has a character in it called the Mathematicians. There's a whole section of poems about my grandfather, really kind of watching my grandmother disappear and Alzheimer's affecting her. And so I wrote about that section of their lives in poetry, and there's a lot of math language in it. And then that sort of morphed into telling their story as young people.
Wow. And I would want to hear that. I'm just wondering if, as we go to the conversation, I don't know how long it would take to get that, but
I could go find it if that would be.
That would be great. That'll be like the end of your feature, the beginning of the conversation.
Okay. All right. You have to bear with me for a moment while I go look through my bookshelf. I'll be right back.
Right. In the meantime, Bill Harrison is going to get the three of us in conversation mode. And also in the meantime, you audience, open micers, etc., can take a moment to contribute to the
I'll be done in like 20 minutes.
to the hat that we're just figuratively passing. And then we will get going. I'm actually mindful that this was kind of an awkward transition from Rachel's feature to our conversation, but maybe we can somehow make that that poem be the end and beginning of our conversation. All right.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just hunting around for it.
Okay.
And sorry, I should have muted as I walked out and worried about the baby. It's a lot having a 9-month-old. Let me see.
Nothing like putting you on the spot.
Yeah,
We're doing fabulous. I can't believe you have 2 kids in the other room. So you're
well, they're sleeping, hopefully. That was the question.
amazing. No, you're doing amazing.
Thank you. No, I told everyone on Zoom earlier, my 4-year-old has a fever. So like, it was just the timing is tricky. But that's always the case. If you don't do things when they're sick, you don't go anywhere. So anyways, I found it. So this is The Mathematician's Wife, which is essentially, so my working title for the book was actually Enola spelled backwards, which was of course a nod to the Enola Gay. Interestingly, if you're paying attention to the news, which I think we all are, the record of the Enola Gay has just been stricken from government websites because it included the word gay. But of course, that's not why it was called that. It was called that because it was Paul Tibbitt's mother's name. And she was named for the book Enola or Her Fatal Mistake by Mary Young Riddenbaugh. So he named his plane the Enola Gay which to me as a mom, and also as I was writing this book, I was pregnant. Gosh, I was pregnant with the first one and then pregnant again before the book came out. And so I'm sitting there during COVID, pregnant, right? And thinking, oh my gosh, how would I feel if my child named this plane that decimated people after, like such a strange thing. So my working title was Enola spelled backwards. And, when you work with publishers, they often, oh, people won't get it. That won't sell. So they changed my title. And I still love my title. It was still one of my, back burner ones, but the book, much of those sections of the Japanese character are written in reverse because of this idea of Enola spelled backwards, of course, is alone. And the fact that when Enola was reflected on the water, it would have read alone. And so on some level, did Paul Tibbets know what he was doing? Anyways, it's interesting to me that I took this poetry collection, this is in lieu of flowers with paintings and poetry, and it began at the end of their lives. And then I sort of moved backwards as an artist and started writing the story of them as young people. I think it's all just been a process of mourning them because they were a big part of raising me, big part of my life and identity in California. Lee, as soon as I saw you, I went, oh, California, right? And so this is, it's about my grandmother's Alzheimer's, but it's really about my grandfather. So it's called The Mathematician's Wife. A theorem, woman. Arithmetic drifted in her clouds. Newton chiseled worry lines into her face. Literature knitted her hair. Tangles of physics brushed freckled shoulders. Her eyes, absolute zero. Green. A matrix? I held her hand. She unraveled, thread by silvery thread. Atoms eroded from fingertips, exponents wallowed in shadow. The residue of her numbers hovered, investigating pretzel crumbs long forgotten. A hyperbola, clock. She made apples fall from trees. She shook Darwin's sun. Fractions and exponents multiplied in crushed footprints forgotten. I calculated her. Strange sevens perched in trees, eights multiplied in the breeze. I knew the way you know about a melon. I thought X would remain constant. I forgot to factor Y, years, and Z, memory. A ratio, spiderweb. The mathematics of daffodils, her sun hat to sundress, 3-to-1. Atoms still picked over pretzel crumbs. I longed for the proper equation to explain her back into the ivy. X got forgetful, forgot to take her medicine, forgot to take her bath, forgot to wear her bra at the grocery. X even forgot why. Symmetry, evening, daffodils, just me and the ivy blowing and growing, unraveling into entropy in a garden. And since it's illustrated, there's my grandparents. It's my
Wow, that's great.
my grandpa could never see when I did my paintings. They were all abstract and impressionistic, and he couldn't see them. He's like, I don't see myself in it. So it was like I was painting it for him, and he couldn't see it. But it's why you keep trying, right?
Well, okay, so let's everybody give a hand for both Rachel and Lee before we start the conversation. You were both beautiful, beautiful. There's people clapping in it. So, so I'm just going to start asking each of you what really grabbed you the most in the other person's work.
Well, I'm just catching a bit of my breath. We'll be getting this novel right away. What grabbed me most? I mean, a couple things. The awareness or the bravery, how it took Rachel back to her childhood friend, but to give voice to, I don't know the numbers, several 100,000 Japanese who were killed in those bombings. That's just, even if that's powerful in a Zoom reading of this length, I mean, I just can't wait to read the book. So that really strikes me, that aspect of it. And the I was making a note of something you said, Rachel, at the end, and I love how the poem led to the novel, but that you were did you say you were painting it for your grandfather, even though he couldn't see it? But that's why we keep trying. It's just a beautiful testament to art and what I sense is your humanity. So it's just beautiful.
Thank you. Your reading meant so much to me. I'm like, I already said, like the line that I'm going to continue to think about is the art galaxy, because I'm this painter, writer, poet with a 4-year-old. So I was just like, oh my gosh, like we need to be writer friends. But just how vulnerable and sort of like narrative and open you are about your experience, and how it can then become sort of like a prism through which we can understand the pain, beauty, but pain of immigration and identity. Like, I think there's so much, even with this, a loving family, of just like difference and what difference does to children, and how learning that difference. It was just incredibly poignant, especially right now. And so it was very healing to hear it. I think as a parent, you spend so much time worrying about your children and wanting to protect them, and learning again and again that you can't, and that only gets harder as they get older and older. And so I was just really, really resonating with, you're writing about your own kind of memories as a child, but I could hear the father in it too. And I thought that was really fascinating, the kind of full circle effect you had there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my daughter's 19 now, and yeah, we can't. But I don't know. I want to believe that what we give them, or the arts, or what we can instill, if we can, if not protect, at least it can provide, for them. Um, yeah. Oh, it was wonderful, Rachel.
This is just the human in me, and you can just say you're not going to talk about this. It's a little off poetry, but I'm just wondering what it was like for you as an adopted son to become a father. And if that enters at all into your poetry.
Yeah. So, it's a good question, Nina. I've heard that most parents, or most people, I think it's true, or I've heard that when people become parents, there's some kind of reckoning or thinking, or this watershed, right, of their youth. And um, I mean, it's the greatest joy. And I don't say that for people who choose or can't have or don't want to have children. It's not about that, and that I'm person of the week because I'm a father. I think there's a lot of loss and grief surrounding all forms of parenting. Um, it was difficult, but very joyful, you know. I'm thinking of Rachel's kids at 4 and 9 months, and just I feel like every year is a joy, every year has been joyful. She's 19 now, and she's very much her own person, which is wonderful. She said to me once, and I don't think she'd mind me saying this. I'm very protective of her story and her voice, but I don't think she'd mind me saying this. When she was about 16, she said, Dad, what would you say if I was a Republican? Not that I'm gonna be, but what would you say? I said, honey, I want you to be you, fully you. I would love you no matter what. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I'm wandering too far from your question, Nina, but it's been pretty joyful.
Mhm. I know, even though I don't have kids, that as I get older, I will say to myself, um, oh, I see what she meant. No, my mother. I see what she meant, because I see myself doing something that she does, or did, or something in maybe my relationship with clients or my niece and nephews makes me feel like, oh, you know, now I'm where they were, and being able to watch the child, do things that you might even remember yourself doing when you were
Mhm.
19 or 10 or I don't know
Yeah.
about before. But let me ask you, it's a somewhat different question for you, but are you having, well, how do your children inform, or being a parent inform your poetry, Rachel?
Oh my gosh, so much. It's funny because I teach a lot of women's lit, and we talk, is it damaging kind of to say that women can have it all, that kind of discussion. And I have a writer friend here in Chicago. She's probably one of my closest friends, Julia Fine. And she's got a fourth book coming out now, but the book that it was like my heart when I was pregnant with my first was The Upstairs House. And it's about a woman who is experiencing postpartum psychosis. And she thinks she's haunted by the ghost of the author of Goodnight Moon. Oh, so good, right? And so you're supposed to be reading like what to expect when expecting. And I was sitting there during COVID reading about the haunting of the author of Goodnight Moon. And I think that I was afraid it would make it so that I couldn't write, or that I wouldn't have the time. And that's true. I don't have the time much of the time. I have, an hour a night or something. Um, but it also gave me so much more access. So my character is based on my grandmother who had a baby in Los Alamos, in that isolated hospital where no visitors were allowed, not even her husband if it was past dark, like nighttime visitors. And so to be behind barbed wire in this isolated top secret town that wasn't on a map, having a baby, I was trying to write that. And then I had a baby during COVID. And I'm not equating it, they're very different, right? But I was like, oh, I wasn't getting it. Like I had whole scenes where she had a baby and then she'd go do something. And now I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Like you need to know where that baby is every second, right? And so it made it harder, but also like gave me more depth, I think, with thinking about, gave me more access to who my grandmother was, honestly. If that makes any sense. Yeah. And then having the second one, he just, tags along to all the big sister's activities and gets forgotten. So we're working on the second child syndrome, right?
Right, right. I'm just looking at the time. Okay, so Rachel, before we started the evening, you said something about, I can't wait to ask Lee something. Do you remember what that was?
I wanted to know, okay, so we sort of gossiped a little bit before we started here, but I wanted to know specifically. So I think like we have Avery Young in Chicago, our poet laureate, who's amazing. And I think about kind of what specific needs Chicago has of getting young people connected to poetry. I certainly see this in the City College classroom of, students who, we can't get students to sign up for our intro to poetry class. We try every semester, we have to advertise it. It's like, how do we get young people interested in poetry? And then they're, listening to music and mouthing the words. I'm like, okay, you are, right? You are interested in this. So I'm curious what your goals have been, like as California Poet Laureate, what have you been trying to do to bring poetry to people? Like, do you have a sense of like what's needed in California?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. One challenge was just the size of our state. It's almost 40 million people. So, that's almost 10 million more than Texas, which is the next most populous. So my project, I called Our California, and you know, for better or worse, my plan was to try to encourage and try to give as many people as possible an opportunity to write a poem about their town or their city or their California as they see it, what they love about it, what they hope for, and also what they don't love about it or what they would change. And I mean, that comes out of my thinking of California, as objectively as I can, as a place of bounty. There's, if you drive through the South Bay, as you know, being from here, Rachel, there's the global headquarters of Facebook, eBay, Netflix, Google, this incredible sort of disgusting wealth, if I may. But it's also a place of Japanese internment. It's also a place of terrible poverty, and great class divisions and things like that. So it's been fun. We've gotten poems from, poets laureate and people with 5 or 6 books, and those are wonderful. But what I especially love is that we've had poems from retirees. We've had poems from, grade school kids, which I love. And I think the imagination is there. It's deep wired and natural for a kid to invent, right? I mean, they're going to draw this little thing and it's got 8 legs and 5 tails, but they'll say, oh, that's the family pet, and they'll have a whole story about it. They're naturally, I think, creative. So it's been a lot of fun. One of my favorite kids' poems that came in was a 6th grader from California, San Francisco, and she titled her poem Califragilistic. So I think when it's fun for them, and they can be themselves, the form and the craft and all those things can come later, but I wanted them just to have fun at first.
The joy of it,
Yeah.
which really rings true in what you read too. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Do you have any questions that you wanted to ask Rachel?
Well, I'm thinking about place so much. I was thinking about Chicago, but now I'm thinking about just your background. I hope this doesn't seem like too elementary of a question, but aside from the poem, what was it about? Because you speak with great fondness and love for your grandparents.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was their stories or their lives or something else, but what was it that brought you to writing this novel with such, I don't know if compassion is the right word, but it's clearly a very heavy topic. What was the initial thing that brought you to this idea?
Yeah, I actually, so I was thinking of reading the author's note because it sort of gives a little bit of that background. I started writing this book on the flight home from my grandfather's funeral, and I didn't know I was writing the book. I thought I was just writing like a short story or something. Back before I had children and I could write on planes. That was a very different time in my life. But I wrote that scene of them just like meeting and falling in love, based on like my real grandparents. And I thought it was nonfiction at first when I was working on it. I think I didn't have access to it while they were still alive because they were very tight-lipped about what they'd lived. So my grandmother wrote this book, and it's amazing. It was her letters home, censored by the government, and then she edited them and brought them out through Japan Publications in 1985. And so they moved to Japan together. They lived in Japan for 3 years. She went on peace talks. She was this amazing person. But with us, I think there was a bit of that, like you protect your children thing. And so she never talked to us about it. And my grandfather never talked about it. And we were afraid to ask. And so my whole childhood, I knew they had this amazing story, but I never asked them about it. And then they died. And it was this thing I regretted so terribly. And so I tracked down a bunch of my grandparents' still living friends at the time, and they've all passed away since. So I'm so thankful I had this experience of writing this book and interviewing people, one of whom was an SED who worked with my grandfather by the name of Benjamin Peterson, who he lived in Greenwich Village, and he had me up to his loft, and he showed me he had kept a diary all his time on the Manhattan Project, and he had an entry he'd written on August 6th, 1945, the day the bomb fell on Hiroshima, and he'd been smoking a cigarette. And when they heard Truman's announcement at 11 a.m. On the radio about the bomb, he took his cigarette, he went, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And he burned a hole through his diary. And he showed me this hole in his diary. And so there was this hole in a book, quite literally, right? I took a picture of it. And then I've been working with the archive to gather all these documents and bring them back to the Historical Society. And that's one thing that has been lost since he passed away, and his adult children are trying to find it. It's somewhere in a box, right? And so I think I was really driven to try to stitch together that whole. that was where it kind of started for me. But in order to stitch it together, because I couldn't actually know what had transpired, I had to kind of deviate into fiction. So I veered into imagination to try to get at something I couldn't really solve.
Wow.
So
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. No, Nina, go ahead. I just so moved by, I mean, your grandfather's funeral, and then the journal entry on the day. That's
I know.
incredible. And
I
the
have
cigarette. It's just
this,
incredible.
yeah, I'm working with there's a radio station or a TV station in Japan that's trying to do an anniversary of the bombings coming up, obviously, right? And so they're trying to do a special on her letters. And so I'm trying to get this diary
Mm.
to the news station that's doing them. It's
You
like I'm
know,
down these documents.
it's just this is somewhat related, not directly related, but um, the American writer, North American writer, Japanese American Jeannie Wakatsuki Houston, who wrote the memoir Farewell to Manzanar. Her family was interned in Manzanar, the camp, the prison camp, whatever you want to call it. But she just passed away recently at 90 years old. And I spoke at her memorial. I think her book, this book, so many books and so many thinkers, and um, aside from probably a deeply moving story, I think this is what's going to keep us going.
Well, I certainly, I mean, it's tempting to exist in fiction right now, right? I'm finding myself reading more and more because it's sort of easy to doom scroll as a parent. Um, but I think that historical fiction, I've talked about this a bit with talking about the book is like why fiction and not nonfiction, right? Because I had all these documents and stuff. But I think there's this idea that nonfiction is facts and maybe fiction can be truth. And so I was really invested in like trying to get inside it and not to cast judgment. That's why I mentioned presentism earlier. Like, I think my grandparents had a lot of guilt, a lot. I know they did. But rather than casting judgment to try to just get inside that moment, because look at where we are right now. Like, what do we do? None of us know what to do. And so that's why
Mhm.
I'm so thankful to be in the community of all you wonderful people, because it's like I'm also on maternity leave still, so I'm missing my classroom and getting to see colleagues and talk about the world. And so it's just so poetry is everything right now. Um, Having these communities means everything.
Mm,
Very helpful.
you know,
absolutely.
Lee, I think you mentioned the internment camps a couple of times tonight. Am I right about that? Well, you just did, but and you have two, Rachel and I. Well, one thing is I have some in-laws who are in the camps. And there was a poet. I don't know if he's still alive, and Lee, you're gonna know who it is, and I can't, Fusado
Oh,
something.
yeah.
What's his
Yeah,
name?
Lawson Fusao Inada. He's a
Uh,
former Oregon poet laureate. I think with the camps, um,
Sorry.
I guess what precedes. Oh, go ahead, Rachel. Go
No,
ahead.
I'm just muting because the baby's making noise. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I love the sounds of all the. Um, no, I mean, before policy, I think there is a way of seeing people, and that's what's very dangerous right now, I think, by certain people in the government. Um, I remember telling a family member that because I was born in Korea, South Korea, um, that I wouldn't be surprised if I was put in some kind of detainment at some point. And my very well-intentioned, loving family member said that was ridiculous and laughed it off. But I think anyone with a sense of history in this country, as wonderful as this country is, um,
I mean, never
would
mind.
would 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 say, "Oh, okay, I can see how that's possible." So yeah, I think the arts, I think writers, I think hopefully people can keep telling their stories and keep writing their poems and being true to themselves. But Yeah, it's and I think another thing that's sort of common to this country, and I say this with love, but is a very short sense of history and a very quick willingness and ease to forget it. So we think of 1945 as ancient history, whereas in this country it might be, but we're such a young country, and that was not long ago. And a lot of that thinking is either still very much here or very much at the ready to be reignited, I think, at any time, which we're seeing now.
Well, I'm thinking now of this anthology. Are you in it, or did you coordinate it, or?
The poem that I read,
No, I read that you had, I don't remember whether you had edited this anthology about Asians who were adopted.
oh, yeah, so Agni from, I think it's in Boston, great literary magazine. I co-edited a digital portfolio, so it's on their website of Asian adoptees from different countries.
Mhm.
Um, I and I co-edited an anthology on Asian American writers on faith and spirit, but that's not adoptees only. Um,
But
yeah.
and it's interesting how, with poetry, you don't have to worry about whether or when you're writing fiction or nonfiction. And Rachel, I think also with historical fiction, again, you have the permission to fictionalize something that's essentially not at all fiction, if only it was. But I think that's kind of striking that the two of you have engaged deeply with some phenomena that are both very personal, but also kind of historic in scope.
I want to add also about the internment camps and the kind of horror of the way that we treated American citizens during, World War II. One thing with it being fiction that I decided to include in my book that I went back and forth on a lot is I wanted to include the acronym for Jewish American Princess, even though my book is set in 45. And that acronym didn't come into common parlance until, it was Philip Roth in 59, Goodbye Columbus. And then even later, before it started to be really like picked up in the lexicon. But because, that term, of course, the horrific slur Jap being used during World War II, was spray painted on businesses and broken windows, and the way that this was predominant in their lives. And then, specifically the way it's been used in the Jewish community as a sort of almost like internal policing of other Jews, but specifically Jewish women, like denigrating them for their immigrant status, as in nouveau riche, like how can you with new money behave this way? I just thought that was so important. And that's one of those moments where, because it was fiction, I was able to just be like, yeah, they're going to use this word and I'm going to put a historical note in, because I really wanted that in there, because that is just so strange that it was the same term. But then also I'm teaching 18-year-olds, right, in English 101, who don't know that that was ever a slur, and have no sense of that kind of history, because it does feel so long ago. And one of the things we talk about in class all the time is, if you didn't live it and you learned it through a book, it starts to kind of just like, it's just a funny thing to say for a writer, but like, history is written by the winners, and you only get this slice of the pie if you're reading a history book. And so, how many years will it be before people will forget things that we've lived through? And we talk about that in class a lot. I go, raise your hand if you remember, such and such, the whatever elements of George Bush being elected or this or that. And it's a really humbling conversation for me, because I've been asking it. And as time has gone on, like less and less is remembered. And it's right there in front of me. And so it's like the importance of getting it down, teaching, books with empathy, so that people engage with the past in a way that's not just a multiple choice exam. is something I'm really stewing over and not sure how to solve, but worth having the conversation, I guess.
Mhm.
Thoughts?
I was just gonna say 100%. I think one of at least for me, one of the great antidotes to historical amnesia or the ease or oh, that's not my concern or things like this are books and history, you know, which is maybe I'm preaching to the choir, maybe not, but this is why people shudder around times of banning books or women's books being suppressed or any kind of cultural things that are either blatantly anti-Semitic or racist or whatever it might be. But yeah, I find myself sometimes just saying, thank goodness for poetry and books and the arts. I think they can keep us going, I hope at least.
If only we can write faster than write books faster than they can burn them.
Yeah, and also I think something this might be I don't mean to be reductive or too simplistic, but I think even just something like this where there's some human connection,
Yeah.
just listening to, Caroline's poem or Ruth's poem or Robbie's poem, everyone's work is, I think, a step in the right direction too.
Well, and that on that note, I'm going to wrap us up. The evening is ending, but what a pleasure it has been to share the evening with both of you and also with our wonderful open micers and those we can't see in the YouTube galaxy. Al, anything?
Well, what else can you say but thank you? It was a wonderful night. Thank you to all the open micers, but especially to Rachel and Lee. But an excellent conversation and beautiful reading. So thank you so much. And Nina, who is next month? Lisa Marie Basile and who else?
Yeah, and Jan Beatty.
Okay,
So,
great. Hope to see you all again next time.
all right. Good night, all.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Aloha, everybody. Aloha.
Hi, it was great. Thank you.
I can't.